Welcome to IndiLore, where forgotten histories, lost loves, and hidden legacies find their voice. In this episode, we uncover a secret that slept for nearly 2 centuries. A diary hidden in an attic. A man lost to the sea. A family scattered across continents. And a young woman determined to uncover the truth buried beneath two different skies. Get ready for The Grave Beneath Two Skies, a sweeping tale of love, loss, and the legacies we inherit. Before we begin, hit like, subscribe, share this podcast, and drop your comments. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, settle in. Let the story unfold. The Grave Beneath Two Skies.
The attic door of the old Beijing home creaked open with a sigh, as though it hadn't been disturbed in years. Afternoon light slanted in from the tiny window, catching motes of dust that drifted lazily, shimmering like misplaced stars. Jingyi stepped carefully across the wooden floorboards, pushing aside boxes in search of her missing thesis folder. Her project on early Sino-Indian maritime networks had taken over her thoughts these days. Helped along by two friends in her university, Zubin and Inaya, who carried India and their stories the way some people carry music. She didn't find her folder. She found something else. Behind an old sewing machine lay a lacquered red box, its surface cracked, its hinges rusted. She pulled it out, brushed away decades of dust, and opened it. Inside lay a leather-bound diary, fragile with age, and beneath it, an old sepia photograph. She lifted it closer to the light. A tall man sat with a calm, steady poise, his well-trimmed beard, tailored coat, and striking profile hinting at a homeland across the western seas. Next to him sat a young woman with an infant in her arms, her quiet grace and finely pinned hair giving her the look of someone shaped by river winds and old Canton streets. She held her child close, her delicate features and traditional attire softening the photograph with warmth and quiet strength. The man's gaze was steady, intense, as though trying to bridge the distance between his world and the lens that captured him. The child, barely a year old, had the faintest shadow of a smile. Something in the baby's face tugged at her, a tug she felt in her bones. "Nay will know," she murmured and hurried downstairs. Mei Ling sat by the window as she always did, the sunlight resting gently on her 93-year-old frame. When Jingyi placed the photo before her grandma, the old woman inhaled sharply. "Oh." Just a single word, yet filled with recognition, sorrow, and something close to relief. "Where did you find this?" Mei Ling whispered. "In the attic," Jingyi replied softly. "Do you know them?" Mei Ling didn't answer at first. Her fingers trembled as they traced the outline of the man's face. "Bring me the diary," she said. "We must read this together." The diary opened with a faint crack, as if awakening after a long sleep. The early pages were written in English, slanted, deliberate, the writing of a man educated and sure of his hand. The later pages shifted to traditional Chinese characters, the phrasing distinctly Cantonese, steady, careful strokes that preserved memory as if memory itself were a fragile animal. Two voices lived in that book. The first belonged to Farokh Wadia, Farokhji, as he signed. The second belonged to Ming, Mei Ling's father. Farokh's voice rose from the pages like a tide. Bombay, early 1800s, unfurled around them. The smell of the Arabian Sea, the mix of Gujarati, Marathi, and Persian along the streets, the rhythmic clang of shipyards. Farokh had been born in Surat, orphaned as a child, taken in by the famous shipbuilding Wadia family. Raised on Malabar Hill when it was still a quiet ridge overlooking restless waves. groomed to handle maritime business, trained in mathematics, languages, diplomacy. He married Dinas, his guardian's daughter, gentle, traditional, devout. The diary did not accuse her of anything. It simply showed a quiet marriage where respect replaced intimacy. The opium trade grew under British pressure, and Parsi, skilled, trusted, familiar with ships, became vital intermediaries. Farokh became one of them, sailing repeatedly between Bombay, Calcutta, and Canton. But it was in Canton that his writing softened, deepened. He met Pikha, a Tanka woman whose strength lived behind her silence. She worked near the foreign traders' quarters, her world weaving between river tides and small household chores. She listened to his stories, not because of his status, but because she saw the lonely man beneath the polished surface. Their affection grew quietly, inevitably. When Pikha became pregnant, judgment followed swiftly. Farokh secured a tiny home for her in a village upriver. Bamboo walls, tiled roof, a garden where she planted lilies because she liked how they shuddered in the breeze. There, their son Hoy was born. Farokh adored the child. His diary radiated with a conflicted joy. Joy at the life he had helped create, and guilt toward Dinas, who waited for a child who would never come. He wrote of Canton's river winds, of Hoy's first steps, of Pikha's quiet strength, and of a longing he could not name. Then the entries stopped. Mei Ling turned the pages until Ming's handwriting appeared. Firmer strokes, the weight of adulthood in every line. Ming wrote of the news that reached Canton. The British and Chinese authorities announcing that the opium vessel Farokh sailed on had vanished in a cyclone in the Bay of Bengal. No survivors, no remains. But the diary had survived because Farokh, like many frequent traders, left it in his lodgings during voyages. A landlord delivered a teak trunk to Pikha containing his clothes, a pocket watch, a few coins, and this diary. Hoy carried the diary like a fragile thread to the father he barely remembered, and when his time came, he passed it to his son, Ming. Ming was educated, fluent in English and classical Chinese, and he read every line as though listening to a distant heartbeat. He added his own memories to the blank pages, stitching their family story into the margins of Farokhji's words. When Ming passed away, he entrusted the diary to his elder daughter, Mei Ling, asking her to guard it as their most precious inheritance. And now, to Jingyi. Jingyi closed the diary slowly. Something inside her shifted, an ache, a curiosity, a sense of belonging she hadn't known she lacked. She began talking to Zubin and Inaya more deeply than ever before. At the Beijing University Cafe, she told them about the diary, the shipwreck, the photograph. Zubin's eyes widened at the surname. Wadia? That's a huge Parsi name. Their shipyard shaped Bombay's entire maritime history. He told her about his community's migration from Persia, about Parsi traditions, about their burial customs, about the Tower of Silence on Malabar Hill. He explained how important merchants like Farokh once were to the city's trade routes. For the first time, the world in the diary felt real, vivid, tangible. It didn't happen overnight. But one evening, after rereading a passage in which Farokh described the Canton Delta wind as reminding me of Bombay calling me home, she felt the decision settle into her chest like a tide meeting the shore. She closed the diary slowly. "Nay, nay," she whispered. "I want to go to India. I want to see where he lived and if he is remembered." Mei Ling froze, not in shock, but in a way that made the room feel smaller. Her hand tightened around the diary's spine. No, she said softly, just one word but firm enough to hold the air between them. Jing Yi blinked. No? Mai Ling's voice trembled. Why stir sorrow that has already traveled so far? Your great-grandmother Pikha, she carried her grief alone. Hoi died young. Ming spent half his life trying to understand a man he never met. And She stopped, swallowing hard. I don't want you to inherit their loneliness. Jing Yi stepped closer. Nay, you're not protecting me from loneliness. You're keeping me from understanding it. Mei Ling closed her eyes, as though the truth pained her. Mei Ling's fingers trembled slightly, her resistance cracking. But India is far, she said, and you will be alone. I won't be, Jing Yi replied. Zubin and Inaya have already promised to help. Their families will guide me. I won't walk the story without a hand to hold. The silence stretched, thick with fear and love. At last, Mei Ling opened her eyes. There was no certainty in them, only surrender and a fragile hope. Then go, she whispered. But promise me you will return with more light than sorrow. Jing Yi held her hand. I promise. Mumbai welcomed Jing Yi with humid air, honking taxis, and a pulse that felt almost familiar. Zubin's cousin Kenaz guided her through the city. She walked past buildings whose pale walls had witnessed centuries. The Asiatic Library, Ballard Estate, and old port warehouses. Jing Yi stood outside a fire temple, observing worshippers move with reverence. She tasted the sea breeze on Mumbai's Marine Drive, imagining Farokh breathing the same salt centuries ago. The Wadia shipyard still stood, weathered, resilient. She touched its sandstone walls, realizing this place had shaped her ancestors' destiny and, by extension, hers. But she wanted more, a name carved somewhere, a memory made stone. The search for Farokh Ji's resting place began like a whisper, soft, persistent, and impossible to ignore. But soon it turned into something else, a labyrinth of dead ends. No record of Dinas in the Parsi Panchayat, no burial record for Farokh Ji, no mention of Farokh's father-in-law, Framji Wadia's family, beyond scattered archives. The British records in the Asiatic Society Library mention the shipwreck, but nothing about survivors or memorials. The more they searched, the more Mumbai resisted. By the second week, frustration gnawed at all of them. One evening, rain pounded against the cafe windows as they sat together defeated. It's all gone, Jing Yi murmured. Everything washed away. But Zubin shook his head. In Mumbai, nothing is ever entirely lost. It is merely buried under too many stories. He was right. 2 days before Jing Yi was due to return to Beijing, Zubin's uncle guided her to Dr. Rustam Bharucha, an elderly Parsi professor with bright, curious eyes. He examined the photograph long and silently. This man, he murmured, he resembles someone briefly referenced in a side ledger, a Wadia who died at sea. And then he said quietly, for those lost far from home, families sometimes built symbolic memorials in small Parsi cemeteries. Try this place. He gave her an address. On their last day, they visited an old synagogue in Baikula. The synagogue was dilapidated, its walls peeling, its windows cracked. But inside, the silence was dignified, sacred. And in a back room filled with brittle ledgers, they found it. A register entry from 1832, a donation made by Mrs. Dinaz Farooq Wadia for a memorial in honor of her late husband. Heart pounding, they reached the cemetery attached to the synagogue. The sky glowed orange, the tide shifting beyond the broken boundary wall. An elderly caretaker walked with her between moss-covered stones. "We don't get many visitors," he said gently. "Your ancestor must have been deeply loved for someone to carve his name, even after death denied him a final return." At the far end, overlooking the sea, she found it. A small weathered stone, covered in dust thick as ash, the inscription nearly gone, but not entirely. "In memory of Farooq Wadia, who sailed the opium seas and never returned. May he find peace across the waters he once knew." Below it, in fragile letters, "Placed by Dinaz, who waits for the sea to return what it took." Jing Yi's tears fell before she could stop them. Her breath caught, her knees weakened. She touched the stone with trembling fingers, as if touching his hand across 2 centuries. Tears blurred her vision, spilling freely. She wasn't just crying for him. She was crying for Pikha, for Dinaz, for Hoy, for Ming, and Mei Ling, for all the silences, losses, and buried histories in her bloodline. "You're not lost anymore," she whispered. "I found you." The waves roared against the rocks, as if carrying her words to a soul waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. She returned to Canton with a small vial of sand taken from beside his memorial and a photograph of the stone. Mei Ling held the new photo against the old one. The man, the woman, the baby, and the memorial that finally acknowledged him. "He wandered so long," Mei Ling said softly. "And you brought him home." But Jing Yi shook her head. "No, Nene, he brought me home." They opened the diary again together, its pages glowing in the late afternoon sun. In those pages lived Farooq's longing, Pikha's courage, Hoy's silence, Ming's devotion, and the echoes of a family story lost to the sea. Until now. That night, as Jing Yi carefully set the diary back into its teak box, she noticed the box didn't sit flat. Something thin and brittle was stuck underneath. Frowning, she lifted the box and found an old, worn envelope pressed to its underside. So discolored, it looked at first like a scrap of useless paper that had long ago lost its purpose. But when she tried to peel it free, the weight of something inside shifted. A letter. She eased the envelope open, curiosity sharpening her movements. Inside was a message dated 3 months after Farooq's supposed death, written unmistakably in his own hand. "My dearest Pikha, I am alive. The British believe me drowned, which suits my purpose. I will return when it is safe. Wait for me where the river meets the sea." Jing Yi stared at the page, her breath unsteady. The letter carried a Calcutta postmark, but Farooq had never come back. The story she thought she'd completed had only just begun.